Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Yeah, it was horrific. I actually wasn't there, so I was more on the cold case side. My team and I looked at the photos, which were, I can't imagine really being there, and then the photos, are another thing. But it was very traumatizing looking at those photos.
So, just a few months later, it happened again, right?
Yeah, and I'll back up. So the perpetrator went a step further, and 10 days after killing Angela, he took her head and threw it in a canal. That canal was further south at an area called I-17 in Dunlap, maybe about 2 miles. And it would later come into play. The next murder would be on the other side of that canal. So he obviously was comfortable in that zone. But Angela's head being found sent more shockwaves through the community. And then there was certain theories that I think they reached out to the military at the time, just talking about speaking to experts, and tried to gauge whether or not the head had been in the canal the whole time, or whether or not the head had been preserved. And there was a theory, or a pretty strong theory, that her head had been either refrigerated or frozen, which is deeply disturbing, and from that level. So with that said, there was another a sign found, a retiree in an alley a couple days after the murder, and it said, "I chopped that bitch's head off," and in red lipstick. So there was a theory that, hey, teenagers could have just written that, or it was our killer. Turns out, I think personally it was our killer, because that was his bike path to his grandparents and his relatives. So all that happened, and then detectives just work round the clock for so from November of 92 into the spring of 93, canvas basically just saturated the canals, trying to figure out who would have done something like this. The focus of that investigation with Angela was primarily at the beginning on her fiance boyfriend, Joe. Joe ultimately was ruled out, but he didn't do himself any favors in the beginning. Angela's mother said basically that, and this was kind of corroborated by her coworkers and friends, that she wanted to leave Joe. Joe was kind of controlling. She was planning on moving out of that apartment and kind of backing out of the relationship. Joe told detectives everything was hunky-dory, everything was great. He was interviewed 3 separate times. And kind of put through the ringer. But again, and another thing he did is he brought a female over to look for Angela during the middle of the night, which was deemed odd by investigators. And because he said she was his financial advisor. So if your girlfriend, fiance goes missing, you invite this random female over to start looking for her. It just didn't all add up. So again, Joe was ultimately ruled out, not the killer, was put through the ringer. But again, he didn't do himself a lot of favors in the beginning with his inconsistencies and what the investigators found. Fast forward to, so that's all kind of going on in 93. We go to September. There is a 17-year-old female by the name of Melanie Burness. She lives in what's called the Arcadia area of Phoenix, which is on the east side near a canal. That canal goes, she ended up, we found out later, rode the canal about 10, 12 miles in kind of a northwest pattern towards that where Angela's head was found earlier. But Melanie had last been seen by her mother. It was kind of sad. Great girl, junior in high school, played volleyball, athletic, worked a part-time job at a yogurt shop, had lots of friends, had the whole world in front of her, had 3 older siblings who had moved out. She was kind of the baby of the family. Unfortunately, her parents had just recently gone through a divorce. So that was really weighing on her. Her mom goes out to dinner. the mom, Marlene, comes home that night and finds Melanie is gone. She sees also that her bike is missing, and she knows she likes to ride. She doesn't know exactly where she likes to ride, but it's just around typically that area or possibly the canals. She checks with Melanie's friends, and nobody has seen Melanie. She checks with hospital. She calls the police, does everything that a worried mom should do. And unfortunately, Melanie was found floating in the canal on east of the I-17 in Dunlap that next morning. Basically, two callers had called in. One was a jogger who saw a big pool of blood on the bike trail, and another woman had rode through the bike trail unknowingly with her children, went home, and then thought about it and called police. This was all before cell phones. So that is kind of set the table for the scene with Melanie.
All right. Well, two grisly murders in this basically the same area, almost the same MO. How did once you actually started looking at the case, how did you proceed with it?
Well, Melanie was also wearing her shoes and socks. So both victims at this point, we have a sample size, it's limited of 2, but we have the same kind of signature on that. We have very diverse fantasies. So we have Angela, almost her head taken, cut in half, just mutilated. And Melanie, he did kind of went a different route. He drug her considerable distance into the bushes. He basically cut and tore her clothing off and redressed her in a bodysuit. It was a Park Lane, I think was a brand at the time. But it was built for probably an 8 to 10-year-old girl. It was designed, and Melanie was 17. She was developed, so it was kind of grotesque that he pulled this really tight bodysuit on her. And then for whatever reason, he also carved some items on her chest, which were, it was WSC, the letters in capital. And then right below is a cross with 3 dots in it. And then he drug her back and for whatever reason put her in the canal. And that's where she was found. So you have two very, again, different fantasies. There was also a very slight cut on Melanie's neck. And to this day, we don't know if he intended to cut off her head, maybe was interrupted, or just wanted to do that. It was a very, very thin cut on her neck. So that's kind of where it was left. A ton of work on the front end. The 2 detectives ended up retiring, but they were phenomenal. They did a great job. I always say, from a cold case perspective, if it's not done right on the front end, then there's no hope for us on the back end with cold case. So they, kudos to them. Everybody was involved. Hundreds and hundreds of people on the Phoenix Police Department were involved in that initial investigation. Unfortunately, so Joe was ruled out by DNA. This is in the infancy of DNA in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. In the mid 90s, Joe was ruled out. It was uploaded into the CODIS national database in 99, 2000 when that really took off. But there were no matches. So it went from 2000 to when we picked it up in 2011 with no hits.
So there was plenty of opportunity then to develop DNA profiles from both of the victims, correct?
Yes, there was a semen left at both scenes.
Okay, and those matched?
Yes. Now that was one of the first things they did was they matched those, and even before they uploaded it into the national database, they were able to, again, it's in its infancy, but they were able to put those together and say, yeah, it's definitely the same guy.
Yeah. Well, there's pros and cons to that. Obviously, it to me causes all sorts of anxiety, really, with detectives. DNA is one of those things where you either can't get it, and so you think there should be DNA at a crime scene or on evidence, and then you can't really collect it, which is kind of where the MVAC comes in, because it can get down a little better and collect more DNA. And so a lot of times we can develop profiles where the other methods couldn't. But the other side of that is you have plenty of DNA, but nobody to match it to. And I know both of those scenarios cause all sorts of problems for detectives in trying to solve cases. But at least when you have DNA, you know that that's the first step. And then, even eventually, obviously the hope is one day this guy will screw up again. And, you don't ever want him to cause more crime, but ultimately that's, if he's going to do more crime, you hope that he gets caught, and then that DNA will get uploaded and bam, you have a match. So how did that happen for you guys?
I think the prevailing opinion was that he's dead, because you have no pre-crime behavior from Angela's murder in '92. You have nothing that bad, and then you have '93 Melanie, and it just stops. And then he gets uploaded, no hits. So that was kind of everybody was scratching their head, and they just the easy thing to do, I think, was say he's dead. Let's move on. We've got other cases to work. Let's, if, like you said, if eventually he screws up, if he is still active, then it'll be uploaded and it'll all hit. So that was kind of the wish. Unfortunately, that really did not resonate well. So I received a public records request in 2011. I'm all about cooperating with the media, but I'm also a big advocate of holding some stuff back. We've had a lot of problems with false confessions, with inmates getting public records and basically tying up detectives' time with saying, hey, I know all about this murder and I want to work off my charges, that kind of thing. And it's a big waste of time. So there's that kind of push and pull with law enforcement with public records. With all that said, my goal as a sergeant was to let my detectives do their thing and investigate crimes and take some of that admin stuff off. So I decided, hey, I'm gonna go through and redact this and take out some of the things that need to be redacted out of these cases. I printed it out, and I always joke, I got yelled at by the secretary for the commander. She said, Sergeant Hillman, what are you doing? And so there's the amount of toner and the amount of paper that we. So I said, I'm gonna redact these Canal Murders. With all that said, I locked myself in a room. I figured I was just horrified. I'd heard about it, but until you really dig into it, read it, start to look at the pictures and that kind of thing, it's just shocking that happened, and that we just kind of are saying he's dead. And it's like we wanted to know more. I wanted to know more at the time. So I knew that as a CPA that maybe I could look at it. Maybe there's something sticking out, but I came up with nothing, realized I needed to have help. And so at that point, I had built a really elite team of detectives, very proud of them. All of them had a ton of passion. They weren't your prototypical, hey, let's go over to Homicide, and who's kind of wants to retired on duty, wants to come over to cold case and shuffle some papers and act like they're busy. These were basically recruited people, and they were also had to go in front of an oral board or a panel to demonstrate that they wanted to be on the cold case squad. So I always say, and I go into more of it in my book, each one of these people brought a different skill set and a different personality to the team. And that really helped us kind of see things differently and really bounce ideas off each other. And then just keep the levity there too. We had some that were a little bit more goofy and kind of kept the team, because we went through on this march that I'm going to get into, this 3.5-year hunt. We went through ups and downs. It was basically a roller coaster of emotions. Hey, we think this guy's good for it. We fly all over the country. We got his DNA. Hey, we give it to the lab. Lab calls us and says, no, it's not him. Back to the drawing board. So there were these, again, moments of highs and lows, and that really, this team. So that's when we started. We had a lot of planning meetings. We brought in the crime lab. We were very fortunate to have a very talented DNA supervisor by the name of Kelly Merwin. She had kind of a steel trap of a mind. She could say, oh yeah, I remember that case. I remember that. And just details that you wouldn't typically know. So she was phenomenal. We had a great relationship. I could call her. My team could call her. We could bounce ideas off of her and her team. So that was basically, everything was gelling at that point. And then we kind of got into it. And one of the first things we do with a cold case is, it's cold case 101, is look at what did we miss? Let's go back to the original reports. Is there anybody in there that kind of sets off our spidey senses, so to speak, as we need to get his DNA? We should have got his DNA, but maybe we weren't thinking about it. Again, early 90s, infancy of DNA. And there were a number of those. There were a number that we got excited about because they were in the files. They made odd statements. They had a background that was more conducive to doing this kind of thing. So again, kind of cherry picked those, headed all over the country, got their DNA, and then those were ruled out. One of the other things we did is we took a look at the military aspect. And I see you're a Ranger. I love the military. My dad was in the Army. My father-in-law was in the Army. But these were very, one of the things I didn't talk about earlier, these were very proficient kills. Basically, it was almost a blitz attack where the perpetrator drove the knife basically into both of these girls' back in the same region. It was in, I think, the 10th rib. It immediately penetrated the lung, the aorta, the heart, and they were basically killed almost instantaneously. So it was very proficient. So one of the things we looked at is, hey, we bantered, is this something that's taught in basic training? Could a basic training, or is this more advanced? Is this more of a specialized skill? Because again, this guy, in the scheme of things, spent a lot of time with those girls and nobody saw anything. And it was really odd to have that amount of time, and then strong to be able to drag, I hate to say it, but dead weight, considerable distances. And that would have, so we had this concept that maybe we were looking for a Rambo in kind of the back of our head. And we have Luke Air Force Base, which is on the kind of the southwest side of the valley here. We thought, well, although the Air Force doesn't really have any elite, they have pilots, but I don't know of any elite fighters. So we kind of bantered that around to say, again, and not to denigrate the military, I'm 100% supportive, but maybe our guy went off the rails and had this specialized training. So we looked at that. We looked at the FBI had put together a profile, which was interesting, but it really didn't direct us in any specific direction. It didn't say, hey, look over here, it's Bob, or, it just was kind of it was somewhat generic in places that basically this guy liked detective magazines. He could be in a mental institution. He was a loner. He was very comfortable around the canals. One of the nuggets that I took away personally was it said, the whole killer will not stop. So why did he? That was so many questions, Jared, on this as to what was going on. So that's one of the things we took a look at. We also had a number of clues that the perpetrator left both on the bodies and at the scene. He was very comfortable in tunnels. We didn't know why. He basically graffitied the same carvings that were into the second victim, Melanie, onto the tunnel wall, and then a message that said Tweety with a image of a guy in a fedora hat. We believe that was him because the W's were basically matched up. So we're trying to figure out what is he trying to, WSC with the cross with 3 dots on the body. What are the 3 dots? So I went and took a detective with me, and we went to Grand Canyon University. They have an excellent theology department. We talked to a professor, showed him, the pictures without scaring him because it was pretty graphic, but we just showed him the 3 dots and said, hey, what does that mean? He said, well, I could be Father, Son, Holy Ghost. I don't really know. What about the WSC? And he said, the working theory was it was West Side City, which is a pretty prominent gang here in Phoenix. But I thought there was more symbolism. I thought there was a lot of religious putting her in the water. Maybe we get into baptism. Maybe we get into beheading with John the Baptist. There was just a lot there. So another working theory was Westminster Shorter Catechism. So we ended up talking to a pastor who dealt with that, and I think I offended the poor man. I tried not to say that, and he was very emphatic that would not be used in such a horrific murder. Again, we were just trying to solve a crime and just push it forward. So There were a lot of different things we covered. Again, this was a 3.5. We had people, a guy that basically was on a dating site and kept emailing a woman saying, I did it, I did it, I did it. And so we ended up doing really triaging his background, and we did a full-blown search warrant, brought him in. Turns out he was just maybe had some mental issues. Again, we covered this whole ground. And then if you want to, I don't want to overwhelm you with talk, but then we basically were invited to go back, and we found out this group in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, called the VDOC Society. Upper echelon law enforcement, brilliant. Dr. Fitzpatrick is a member. She wasn't at the time. Got to know the profiler, one of the founders, Rich Walter was his name. Extremely eccentric, very brilliant, but he's very controversial too. But he literally told us there's a 97% chance this guy's in your file. This guy is a Bundy or Dahmer subtype. He labeled him as anger excitement. And he said, again, 97% chance he's in our files. And I remember we were 3 years, I think 2.5, 3 years deep into this investigation, and our files were massive. We had this list of over 800 to 1,000 names of men that had been called in on, and basically listed them. And so we went back to our files and said, okay, if he's saying 97% chance in our files, we're going to go back. So I took the Z's, another detective of mine, Clark, took the A's, and we were going to meet in the middle. And that was right there. I kind of laughed because if I had started with the M's, maybe we would have accelerated our process, because our perpetrator was really named Miller. So we started doing that. But again, it was a very methodical process of sifting through, of getting DNA, of traveling.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.